welcome to the ThinkMHK Podcast presented by the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce. On this podcast, you will hear about a variety of local matters pertaining to the business community. You also hear from local business owners to hear their story and gain valuable business insights. Thanks for tuning in today. My guest today is Ron Fehr, City Manager from the City of Manhattan. Welcome, Ron, to ThinkMHK.
Thanks, Jason.
You're officially the first quote-unquote non-chamber specific guest on this show.
I feel honored.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, based on the relationship we have with the city, and it's appropriate that you would be the first non-chamber person, although you're technically a chamber person because you're an ex officio member of the board. So,
right.
But welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being with us today. Talk a little bit about yourself for those that don't know you, and how did you end up in Manhattan?
So I started out in Manhattan in college, went to K-State for 2 years. I was actually in the pre-forestry curriculum, and it was set up to go other places to finish. And so I actually transferred then to the University of Missouri in Columbia and got my undergraduate degree in forestry and park management. Graduated in 1981 from there and went to work I'd been working during seasonals, summers and stuff for the U.S. Forest Service and the Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming. And when I was at K-State, I did some minor specialization in urban forestry. And my brother sent me an article had a picture of the city's forestry truck that had tipped over loading a big tree onto the truck and said, "Ron, Manhattan needs you." And so that was during the Carter administration when the professional registers were frozen. And so my chance to get on with the Forest Service didn't look real good. So I applied for a job that came open eventually in Manhattan, and it's when they were forming the Parks and Recreation Department. We used to have a Parks Division, and then we had a Recreation Commission, which was actually under the school district. So Tim Venata was hired to be in that position, and I got recruited to be the Park and Forestry Supervisor under that position, and that was in 1982. Just celebrated my 40th anniversary
Congratulations.
Last week, so thank you. Started out as the Park and Forestry Supervisor, made my way to be a Park Resources Superintendent, Park Administration Superintendent, then Assistant City Manager. All that time, I started working on my master's degree in public administration, and Mike Condiff was the city manager at the time, and he says, you could have my job once you finish that. And I said, well, I don't think that's the plan at all. But I did have a desire to maybe get more into administration and that sort of thing. So, one thing led to another. Mike went on down to Bryan, College Station, Texas, and Jim Pearson moved up, was the assistant city manager, became city manager, and invited me to come over and be his assistant city manager. I just finished my MPA, and so it was a great opportunity for me, and was assistant city manager. That was back in 1992, and then became city manager, and I was acting city manager a couple times. I've been in a number of acting positions for the city over the years, and then became city manager in 2000.
So you've been city manager for nearly 22 years?
Yes.
What's the secret to longevity? City managers don't usually stay in those positions for 22 years. Sometimes it's strange to see one last more than 10. So what's the secret to longevity?
So I really think it's about relationships, gaining trust and good communication with not just the city commissioners who are your boss, but the organization as a whole and the community as a whole. And so I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great individuals, and one of those great partners has been the Chamber of Commerce. And so certainly as the various leaders and Chamber board members, the business community, I think is a very important component in the community. K-State, obviously, we've had a great town and gown relationship even before me. So all of those are, the key to that is having good relations and trust and support with one another.
Yeah, it's interesting. My predecessor, of course, Law Butler, was with the Chamber for 20 years. You've been with the city manager's office for over 20 years. Some of that could also be Manhattan. I mean, you just don't see the radical shifts in what people want. It seems like year to year, and people like stability and sort of kind of keeping on a steady level playing field.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate and blessed to be able to stay in Manhattan. We think it's a great place. We've raised our family. The kids all went to Manhattan schools and graduated from Manhattan High and in the same house. So that's unusual, especially in my profession, for that to occur.
So let's go back for a minute and talk about you decided to go into forestry. Talk about that. What would make you want to do something like that? Where did you grow up?
So I was actually born near Wakefield,
Okay.
in Clay Center. We had a family farm there, and actually Milford Lake took our farm. But I was the youngest, had two older brothers, and probably wasn't going to stay in farming. I always liked the outdoors. I hunted, fished, all that sort of stuff. So that kind of caught my interest early. But at the same time, in high school, I was our student council president, and during college was on the Ag Student Council and the Forestry Club president at Mizzou. And so I was always kind of interested in that kind of leadership and service as well. And so that kind of intrigued me. Clearly, when I started my MPA at K-State, being in city management really wasn't one of those goals. But certainly as I grew more to that, it's one of the things that I think has been, I worked for the federal government with the Forest Service all through college. I worked as a work-study student, so worked for K-State, worked for the University of Missouri, and so saw state government and really was enamored with local government. And you're close to the people, and you really can see your accomplishments from starting of the planning to budgeting a project to seeing it through to fruition. And so, that sense of accomplishment, I think, has always been one of the things that's drawn me to that aspect of things.
So your time in Columbia did not make you a Missouri fan, or are you still a little bit?
It did not. Matter of fact, I actually transferred the middle of the year, and my first game I went to was a K-State Mizzou game, and I was in a dorm that first semester, and when they K-State made that first bucket, and it was just like I was in Ahern, right? Only it was in the Hearn Center, and I got up and shook my fist, and I looked around and I go, oh, this is not going to be good.
You weren't sitting in the middle of the antlers, were you?
No,
okay.
I hadn't really experienced the antlers yet,
gotcha.
And so that was not a good thing. But no, I've bled purple and continue to bleed purple, especially when I came back and got my master's here.
And we're all glad to hear that. So you talked a little bit about this already, but Manhattan is unique in the relationship, in a lot of different ones, but for purpose of this conversation, between the city and the business community through the chamber. Obviously, you're a big reason for that. Why do you think that relationship is important, and what benefits does it have for Manhattan?
Well, really, I think, for a long, long time, we've been made up of a lot of local businesses. That changed a lot when the mall came in, and I was just starting. My only contribution to the mall was I picked out the original trees for the streetscape. But that was a fascinating process, and certainly listening to those community conversations about how these big national firms were going to come in and change the face of the community versus locals. And that was a big concern with the community. And just the heart and soul of the business community is really shows and illustrates how the community is doing. And in my opinion, they create the jobs and certainly create the opportunities and the risks that folks take to compete and stay in business and prosper, hopefully. And so that kind of really introduced me to that. But at the same time, as we kept growing, and certainly during the Weefald era when K-State grew a lot and we had a lot of students, it also was apparent that the locals probably aren't going to keep up with the demand. And so we went through some interesting rezonings with a proposed super Walmart that was, going where Target was going to go and all of those discussions. But and I think that led to there was a demand. There was a lot of interest from outside entities to come in and set up shop here. And so I think we've tried to we learned some hard lessons because we reacted somewhat to some of those proposals from those national firms. And then we finally, after a lot of discussion and folks that really didn't want to proceed that way, we got into, let's do the hard work and see what the community wants and look at further redevelopment. Redevelopment's an arduous process. It takes a long time. It's easy sometimes. It's easy to go out to a cornfield and throw up some buildings. It's harder to purchase existing businesses that have been there a long time and have a relationship. But I think we learned some things during the mall era. And so one of the things that we tried to do during our other redevelopment of the north end and the south end was, if the business that we were trying to purchase wanted to stay in business, we wanted to help them stay in business. So we tried to really put in some favorable relocation packages, and by and large, we were pretty successful in keeping those businesses that clearly wanted to stay in business in business.
So in terms of the chamber, the city has an agreement with our organization to provide services. So one of the areas is economic development, one is tourism, and then one is military relations. And I think the folks who listen to this podcast have heard me talk about why that's important. But when you talk about it to the elected officials, what's some of the reasoning that you use why that is a benefit to the city of Manhattan?
So that relationship, I think, is a key relationship, and I think the aspect of as you compete in the world now hasn't always been world competition, but clearly the last decade has become that way, and even more so. And I think the business community and the chamber itself is kind of geared towards that recruitment. And it's the businesses that create the jobs and make the investment or paying the property taxes, all of those things, and generate that revenue and that income for everybody, not just the local property taxes and some of them sales taxes and certainly income tax. So for the state. So that having that business relationship to start with is, to me, the right folks that have the right connections, and that public-private relationship is stronger for that recruitment of new economic development prospects. And I think much more so than if it was just the government, an agency of the government that was trying to do that, because that's not part of their normal wheelhouse.
And I've worked in both scenarios, and it is a little more difficult, I think, when it's just a city commission, which is one of the areas that I worked in, because the business community does seem less engaged in that scenario, and they don't feel as much connection to the process and helping make that work. And I find that to be one of the unique attributes of Manhattan is, even as small as our business community is compared to some of the places we compete against, their engagement is probably 2 to 3 times what it is in other places that I've been.
Yeah, and I think that analysis by the chamber staff as well as the chamber board, as you weigh a prospect, you certainly have those local businesses in mind. Is this going to be unfavorable or unfair competition type of thing, or is it reasonable, and will it help the community overall? So I think they're in a unique position to better evaluate that.
And of course, in the case of economic development and military relations, every dollar put in by the city is matched by private sector investment, in some cases more than match. And so you get twice the bang for your buck in terms of tax dollars.
Absolutely. And I think that's certainly a huge plus locally. I don't think you see that everywhere, at least as I talk to my colleagues around the state. That's not something that they see very often. And that's important because you got tremendous skin in the game. And so that's a big component, and it weighs mightily in the overall consideration of the overall outcome, and it's not just sitting there working on a city subsidy, if you will, which is sometimes the claim.
You just said you passed your 40th anniversary. Again, congratulations for that. In your 40 years, what are some of the accomplishments of which you're the most proud?
So there's a lot, but a few that popped to mind. So back in 1986, and it was actually right when the mall was getting ready to open, we did a quality of life bond issue. And actually my predecessor, Don Harmon, who was brought in to help do the original downtown redevelopment with the mall, there was a big demand for sports fields, and adult softball, slow pitch was a big thing back then. And at the time we had these, if you drive off Casement Road and you're out there by Allen Road, or Griffith Drive, I should say, by the Northview School, those two big green fields were the only two softball fields, plus Wilson Field and City Park, that we had in the community. So there was a big desire to upgrade a lot of our outdoor recreation facilities. And part of this stemmed, too, from creating a Parks and Recreation Department. We're really focused on providing those services. Before, with the Rec Commission, they relied on school district facilities and parks. So there really wasn't that mentality that the parks are there to use and be able to have folks to utilize those sports fields. So we were underrepresented in those particular areas. So we did a quality of life bond issue. That was the beginning of Annenberg Park. We built a new softball complex and soccer fields, and it turned out to be very great. The other part of that, we built Seco swimming pool as part of that bond issue. It was a property tax bond issue, about $2.7 million. Seems like a little amount now when we just did, like a $27 million one. So things changed, but it was something for everyone was kind of our philosophy. And I know when we first approached the city manager, Harmon, with prospects for that, he just kind of looked at us, and he was deep in the mall stuff, and so he says, well, if you want to try, you can, but I don't think you're going to be too successful. So the other things we did with that was the start of the linear park on the trail and some of the old Rock Island Railroad that was abandoned as part of that. We also did the T. Russell Wright's Animal Shelter. So the dog pound used to be in the zoo, which kept the zoo from being accredited because you had that there, and so it was a good thing for the zoo as well. And it was just very favorably, very well supported, and that was cutting the ribbon on all of those facilities was a big accomplishment.
And what year was that?
That was 87.
87,
yeah.
So quite a while ago.
Yeah, and that led to a series of other bond issues, renewing that, going with a sales tax bond issue. We've done a ED sales tax that started with back in the 90s. It was a 5-year city tax, and then went with the countywide tax for 2 decades. And now we just, with the chambers certainly support, just renewed it again for as a city sales tax. So those were significant accomplishments in that overall aspect. Clearly the other one that comes to mind is the NBAF. That was an amazing process. Never could I have imagined. We did, and the air service that we got as a result of that, being part of going to the legislature and having the governor's office support for getting a $2 million air service grant through the House and the Senate and on the governor's desk in 2 days was just amazing. And then the pent-up demand that was there was amazing, that getting the deal with American. And I know when the state, this was the time when we were doing the improvements to K-18 and starting to do the planning for the interchanges. And when we told them we wanted to do an interchange at the airport, they just kind of looked at us, because that was when we still had 19-passenger puddle jumpers to Kansas City. And they just they said, well, you're going to have to pay for part of it if you want to add that. So we said, okay, we'll do that. But so it's been very satisfying to see that, wow, that was really the right thing to do back then, and look what it's done for us. So,
and of course, air service is one of the true success stories of Manhattan. There was a subsidy guaranteed, where they guaranteed a certain amount of revenue that you never even had to use.
Right. Actually, we built a $2 million credit. We gave the original $2 million back to the state. So yeah, it was we hit it right, and it worked out very well. Obviously, landing NBAF, still anxious to officially cut the ribbon on that. We're getting closer to that. So that was an amazing team deal, though. I mean, it was nonpartisan. The legislature, the governor's office, the congressional delegation, everybody locally was aboard and behind that, and it was just a true amazing example of cooperation. And so that was a biggie.
And as somebody who didn't live here at the time and was in economic development, was something that definitely was noticed across the country, that Manhattan could land something of this magnitude. And I think drew lawsuits, right? And when there's some communities that were upset about it. So
threatened anyway.
Yeah, so we survived that, and hopefully we will be cutting a ribbon on that very soon. And I think some of the things you talked about are very illustrative of Manhattan's ability to make the key investments that are important to attract other private investment or attract more growth. And I know that's one of the things we've talked about recently, that some of the external forces have really challenged us, both in terms of the reductions at Fort Riley, in terms of reductions of students. And so we've sort of held our own, not grown to the level as I think we have in the past. But considering those external forces, it's really remarkable that we have held our own over the last 10 years. And I've said this before, but I think it's a credit to a lot of the projects that the city has undertaken and the foresight that you all have had to do that in preparation for what we think is going to be a great 2022 and beyond.
Thank you. And it's a team effort. We've got a great team of department heads and other staff at the city, and clearly everybody works together well. I mentioned the town-gown relationship. We've always enjoyed a close relationship with K-State. That's proven out now on the Edge District with the North Campus Corridor, and just with athletics, with the foundation, with all of the various departments of the colleges and university administration itself. So, and that's very unique. It doesn't exist down the river. I can tell you that because my former deputy is a staff person there, and so it's a unique relationship. And I think, from my perspective, one of the reasons for that, we're kind of isolated out here in the Flint Hills, and we're not next to a big metro. And, that's good and bad, but I think it's made us have to certainly work together more and harder to get what we've got. And then we have to work even harder to keep what we've got. That's
100% true. Having been in a suburb, sometimes that masks your problems, and by the time you figure it out, it's too late. So we recently had Mayor Linda Morse on Good Morning Manhattan, and she outlined all of the projects that were coming up for the city, and there's a lot. You all have a lot on your plate. What are one or two of the key issues that our listeners should be thinking about over the next couple of months?
Sure. So you're going to continue to hear about Aggieville. Obviously, the commission there at the end of December awarded a $6 million project in Aggieville to rebuild North Manhattan. One of the challenges we have in Aggieville is that it's one of the oldest shopping districts in Kansas.
It's the oldest,
I think it is.
Yeah, I think I've heard it's the oldest.
And so is the infrastructure. And so we're making a commitment to, we have our Aggieville vision that's been approved that is looking at increasing our density and transforming the area to be more mixed use from that perspective, but still retain the historic nature that it is, and the district that it's always been. But with its location next to campus, it's just prime for capitalizing on opportunities for college graduates. For us to create and attract companies here to be able to retain those graduates. And I think it's those kind of improvements that we're starting to focus on. We did a pre-development agreement middle of last year with Back 9 Development on the 12th and Laramie surface parking lot to transform that into a mixed-use facility that will be very exciting as far as that density is concerned. So discussion on that final development agreement will be on tap for that. And if that's approved, they'd like to get started on that construction-wise this year. We're finishing the parking garage. So for the next couple of years in order to complete that vision. The great thing about this is, we've had investment in Aggieville, the new hotel. We created this tax increment financing district to capture this growth that's going to occur, and that's helping underpin a lot of that cost. And I mentioned just that $6 million North Manhattan project, about 40% of that is utility related, new water lines. We're running all new services to the businesses, both water and sewer. And so it's going to be inconvenient, and it's going to cause some disruption. And so we want to try and do that in phases so it causes minimal as possible. But clearly when you do redevelopment, when we did downtown new streetscaping, there are some inconveniences, but I think everybody I think will be pleased when it's over. We're continuing the work on the Edge District, North Campus Corridor, got awarded another project to do that middle segment of Kimball Avenue. We'll start design this year on the final big intersection there of Denison and Kimball, and try and get that bid and done next year before the official opening of MBAF after they go through their training and testing period. So those are the two biggies. We're into final design on the airport for the runway replacement. That actual construction, for the most part, won't start till next year, and it will involve some having to close the airport and close air service for a couple of months. And so that's something that we need to try and prepare for. Looks like the funding's set up well for that. So those are part of the biggies. Recently, the commission approved setting the date for the public hearing on the new expanded Star Bond district for the Air and Light Museum. And so they were moving the location to that, kind of to the mall parking lot. And so folks will start hearing more about that process. And I think it's a better location. Ultimately, I think most everybody would agree with that, and it's going to be a great improvement for the community. Appreciate the DeBryans stepping forward and with this concept, and the great news of us paying off our Star Bonds 5 years early creates this window of revenue opportunity for them to capture some of that. And make this additional attraction, which I think will be a great benefit to the community and the state and the country.
And, of course, one other issue that the Chamber is paying attention to, the housing study and developing a strategy for workforce housing. And so that's
Absolutely.
Probably something else you'll hear from the Chamber on, because that's something we're very excited about. So.
Most definitely.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you taking your time. But more importantly, we appreciate your partnership and all the things that the city has done to work with the Chamber to improve Manhattan and make it a great place to live, work, and play.
Thanks, Jason. Glad to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of ThinkMHK, a podcast produced by the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce. If you enjoyed the ThinkMHK podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe and share it out on your social media channels. Feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce.